Hey, I want to talk a little bit about the Chinese people, the Chinese. Um, this may seem like a really random video subject, but um, China is one of the countries that has the biggest influence on me. It's a country I've worked in, lived in, and some of the most important people in my life have been Chinese. So outside my own country and possibly the United States, I would say it's the country I think about most. So just want to speak a little bit about what I think some of the positive attributes are of the Chinese people. I can include negative as well, of course. There's positive and negative traits among every nationality. There's good and bad people in every country, etc., etc. But for this particular video, I'm just going to focus on the positive. The reason being is that I've made a number of videos on China and the Chinese in various different aspects, different regards, and a few of them are more critical. So I want to balance things out a bit and maybe anyone watching those videos, I want to kind of just balance it out because I've been particularly critical of issues like the Chinese government, single party rule, and Chinese nationalism. Neo nationalism. I've been particularly critical of those issues. So I want to make us just to balance it out a little bit. It's not to please anyone or anything like that. I'm just being honest. And I think it's an interesting video subject. Okay, so I've met hundreds of Chinese people in my life. I've interconnected with hundreds, if not thousands, of Chinese people. And by Chinese, I'm talking about mainland Chinese. I'm not talking about British Chinese. I'm not talking about American Chinese or anything like that. I'm talking about Chinese, mainland Chinese people. Of course, I've known Hong Kongers and Taiwanese people as well. But for the purpose of this video, I'm talking specifically about mainland Chinese. And it's not intended to be any sort of statement on, the legal status of Taiwan or anything like that. So if you're Taiwanese or a Hong Konger, please don't take this the wrong way. I'm just talking specifically about mainland Chinese here. Um, okay, so I'm going to talk about the positive aspects that I have experienced. Now, other people may have experienced a different thing. That's fine. And a quick disclaimer, if you are from another Asian country and you want to counter anything I'm saying, I'm only being honest on my own experience. And I'm not saying everyone in China is like this. I'm not saying, China has plenty of assholes, as does every country. I'm not disputing that for a second. Um, but, China is a very, very influential country and will be over the next century. So, yeah, here it goes. Young Chinese people, in my experience, tend to be very helpful. I have experienced this numerous times with my own students. My students were high school students, so they were mostly between the ages of 15 and 17. Whenever I had practical problems in the school that I taught in, and to cite one example, I had a bicycle that the school lent me, and it had a puncture one day. So I was going to just ask my students for advice as to where I should go to sort the problem out. Now, they could have just told me where to go, but instead they actually took it on themselves to accompany me the whole way to this garage. And, they didn't have to do that. That was their free time, that was their lunchtime. And, they have an hour free time every day out of a something like 9 hour day. So I thought that was very kind of them to do that. And I told them so. Um, it was definitely helpful because, they could have given me directions and I could have went by myself and I probably could have done it, but the point is the gesture I really appreciated. Then when I got to the garage, the guys at the garage fixed up the bike, they put in a new tire, etc. At the end of that, they were working at it for about 1 hour. I asked, well, how much do I owe you guys? You've done this service, how much I owe you? And they just shook their heads like, no, no, this is free of charge. That was incredible to me. And it could be that I was one of the few foreigners in that city, so we were kind of honored guests or something like that. I don't know quite what it was, but certainly I don't think that would necessarily happen in this country. I'm not saying that people in the UK wouldn't do favors for strangers; they would, but it's you know, that was basically a public service, and these guys done it for free. So without they didn't want to take any payment, so I offered them cigarettes, which in China is quite a common thing. Chinese men. You can make a rather safe bet that most Chinese men are smokers. Not everyone, though. They refused that as well. So I just thanked them and yeah, got on with my day. Other examples of young people being very helpful when I went to the city of Changsha, which is the largest city and I believe the state capital, provincial capital, I should say, of Hunan province. A very big historic city, beautiful city actually, one of China's nicest, most interesting cities in my opinion. Um, yeah, I went there, and although I have contacts with people all over the country, Changsha was one of the few cities at that time I didn't really know anyone. So I was sort of anticipating a day by myself, which always gives me a little bit of anxiety, not from managing the situation, but simply from I tend to get lonely sometimes when I travel in those circumstances, and that's something I've covered in other videos. Anyway, traveling to Changsha from the city that I was working in, which was Yongzhou, about 6 hours by train, which was most of the length of Hunan province. But I kind of was thinking, well, I hope I'm going to get my way around this city. I hope I'm not going to be bored because I'm not kind of, my Chinese is limited. I'm not navigating myself. I won't know where to start, etc. As it turned out, there was some young students from Changsha, university students, guys in their early 20s. They basically took it on themselves to be my guides. And it wasn't a case that they imposed themselves. They asked me, we can accompany you. And I trusted them. I didn't think this was any sort of scam to take money or anything. And anyway, I was, they weren't asking for money or anything like that. So I trusted these guys, and they basically done that. We got out of the station. They looked at my map. They planned out a thing. A few of them had to go somewhere else, but I basically spent the rest of the day in the company of a young couple. Very kind. They took time out of their day to show me around. They brought me up the Yellow Mountain, Yellow Shan, which is a sort of historic mountain, big Chairman Mao statue at the foot of it, so it's got historical connections. Some beautiful scenes from there. At the top of the mountain, um, I met a young woman who took a picture for me, and we've been friends ever since. Not romantic, but good friends. We've kept in touch, and then the young guy and his girlfriend had to leave because they had other business. But then they kind of arranged that this young woman would then help me get back to the station. Now, the thing I want to emphasize with all of this is if it sounds like I'm coming across naive, like putting my trust in strangers, the point about this was there was no money involved. So it's not a case that I'm giving them money to help me or anything like that. You do have to be careful with that when traveling, and especially in China. But I totally trusted these people, and my trust transpired to be accurate because they helped me out. This young woman, who's been a friend ever since, brought me to the station. She made sure I got the right train, everything. Um, Needless to say, my own friends have been very helpful. I suppose you could say, well, they're your friends anyway. But the point I'm making with this is the people that helped me there in Changsha were complete strangers, and they really went out of their way to help. Um, Other examples of what I like about the Chinese people, and again, I'm making a huge generalization here, doesn't apply to everyone. I find the Chinese are very informal in a way that I quite like. Um, there is a sort of stereotype about East Asian countries, and I think this stereotype may be more applied to Japan and South Korea. And no offense to those nations, but there is a stereotype that there is a sort of almost rigidity and overt politeness. I've never been there, so I don't want to talk about it too much, negative or positive. But the Chinese, I find, are very laid back people. If you are invited to a dinner, if you meet ordinary Chinese people, they tend to be very easygoing. They might not understand everything you're saying, and you might not understand everything they're saying, but there is a sort of very easygoing mannerism with them, which I really like. I remember, for example, toasting beers with middle aged, older guys, and it was just very, it didn't matter that I didn't understand Chinese. It didn't matter that they didn't understand English. The point was there was a relaxed atmosphere there. And you might find this in other countries, but that was to me quite a pleasant thing. Um, I also found it in traveling. I would find people would just want to take pictures with me, and I even found like local police officers were easygoing. It wasn't, and I have to say, it somewhat countered my previous notion that China is a very rigid communist country. It is a communist country, and certainly there would be, as you would get in any country, a level of formality in certain parts of the country, especially in the big cities, and I'm sure you would find it among the elite. But among ordinary people, there is an easygoing mannerism, and when you consider that many of these people work very, very hard and long, long days, that's admirable that they can have such a relaxed approach to life in those times. Um, and I think it's something you can only really experience if you've been to China. They're very easygoing people in that sense. That's my personal experience. Now that doesn't mean you have to. It doesn't mean be naive and just trust everyone, because of course you get your con artists, and there's a big problem with that in China. But the point I'm making is, on that personal level, I find most Chinese to be quite amicable. Not everyone. You will get, the con artists. You will get some people who are more wary of foreigners, etc. But I find that informality to be a really welcome thing. What else can I say about the Chinese? Overseas Chinese, I've said a few negative things in some of my videos about nationalism and so on. I stand by that. However, I want to counter that as well with a fair assessment. Um, some of my closest friends I have met as overseas Chinese people. I'm not going to go into too many details because a lot of this is quite personal, but needless to say, I've had abundant experience with this, so I think I'm in quite a strong position to talk about the subject. People I've known on a personal level, and perhaps I'm biased because they are my friends, but in my experience, they tend to be quite open minded, and they actually counter the stereotype of, for example, arrogant and rude overseas Chinese tourists. I'm not denying that exists, but in my experience, people that I've known personally have actually been pretty open minded. They have been willing to learn about other cultures and learn about the host nation and travel and learn about, for example, British culture and take things in. A lot of the Chinese I've known here, for example, have enthusiastically followed local football teams and been enthusiastic supporters of that. And to me, that's really it's really a good thing. Just like when I go to China, or when I went to China, I made sure that I, kind of integrated. I'm not saying became an honorary Chinese, but I do think it's important that when you travel, it should be a principle of when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And notwithstanding what I've said in those previous videos, I'm not going back on that. I stand by it because I've also seen that side. I've seen this side as well, which is a very positive thing, and it's something that I have noticed. Um, And I'll leave it there. I've covered a few things there, so I tend to make some of my videos a bit too lengthy. I want this video to be seen, so I'm going to round it up there. Um, so yeah, to anyone out there who hates the Chinese, to any xenophobes out there, I would just say I take no issue with you, having a problem with the Chinese government, because I think every government can be criticized. And I've no problem with you taking issue with individual Chinese, but please don't generalize a nation of 1.4 billion people. China and the Chinese are as diverse a people as any, and arguably more so than any, because there's more of them than any other nationality. So you can't generalize the Chinese, and that's another thing I like about them. I mean, it is just it's a truism of any country, but you just can't generalize 1.4 billion people. And some of the most generous, open minded, and decent people I've met in my life have been Chinese. So overall, I like the Chinese.